They came like a storm, fast, silent, unstoppable. For centuries, the Mongol Empire crushed armies 10 times their size. Samurai, knights, sultans, none could stand before them. But in the winter of 1240, on a frozen battlefield in the north, something happened that the Mongols never expected. They met warriors who refused to break, refused to run, and refused to die. Only 100 Viking fighters, hardened by the ice of Scandinavia, faced 10,000 Mongol horsemen. And in just 1 hour, the Mongols felt fear. Before we enter this unbelievable clash, make sure you subscribe, because what you're about to hear is a forgotten chapter of history that deserves to be remembered. The year is 1240. The Mongols have already crushed the Rus kingdoms, burned cities to ash, and sent a wave of terror across Eastern Europe. Their next target lies further north, a region known for brutal winters, unforgiving seas, and warriors who lived for battle. A scouting force of 10,000 Mongol riders, led by General Khadan, advances along a frozen coastline. Their mission is simple: find the northern settlements, test their strength, and remove any resistance. But they are not the only hunters in the ice. Far to the north, word spreads among the local clans, tales of strange horsemen who move like shadows, striking from impossible distances with bows that punch through armor. Most villages flee, but one group does not. A band of just 100 Viking veterans, men who have fought raiders, storms, kingdoms, and beasts, make a choice that seems almost insane. They will stand. They will fight, and they will show the Mongols something they have never seen before. Their leader, a towering warrior named Eric the Cold, knows the truth. If we run, they will burn the coast and slaughter everyone. But if we make them bleed, even once, the north will rise. So the Vikings prepare the land. They study the wind, the ice, the snow. They choose a battlefield where horses slip, where arrows lose power, where the Mongols lose their greatest advantage. And as the sun begins to disappear behind the winter clouds, Eric speaks only 3 words. Tonight, they fear. And what happened next became a legend the Mongols never forgot. Night settled over the frozen coast like a heavy cloak. The sky was a deep steel gray, the moon half hidden behind moving clouds, and the wind carried the sharp scent of ice. For most armies, this was a night of discomfort. For the Vikings, it was home. For the Mongols, it was unfamiliar territory, cold, silent, and deceptive. Eric the Cold stood at the edge of a jagged ridge, his breath misting in the air. Below him stretched the battlefield he had chosen, uneven ground, patches of thick ice, and broken rock that jutted out like teeth. It was a place where horses could not charge at full speed, where arrows lost their accuracy in the swirling sleet, and where men who fought on foot, men like the Vikings, held the advantage. Behind him, his 99 warriors prepared in absolute silence. These were not inexperienced raiders. They were men who had survived decades of war. Their faces bore scars carved by blades, frost, and time itself. Their armor was mismatched. Some wore chainmail, others leather reinforced with iron plates. But every man carried weapons sharpened for the single purpose of killing quickly. Long axes, heavy shields, spears waited for close combat. Tools built not for elegance, but for ending lives. Eric scanned the distant horizon. The Mongols would arrive soon. Their scouts had already caught glimpses of Viking movements earlier in the day. Khadan, the Mongol commander, would not ignore that. He was a strategist shaped by years under the thunderous discipline of Mongol warfare. He understood ambushes, deception, and psychological warfare better than most generals of his age. And now he would test these northern warriors the same way he had tested dozens of armies before. A young Viking named Arna approached Eric. His beard was still thin, his eyes burning with a mixture of fear and determination. Will they come in the dark, he asked. Eric nodded. They prefer the night. They think it makes them ghosts. But they forget we are children of the dark. He placed a hand on the young warrior's shoulder. Stand firm. Fear is for men who hope to live forever. By the time the moon rose higher, the distant thunder of hooves began to roll across the ice. It was faint at first, like a slow heartbeat under the ground. Then louder, then unmistakable. The Vikings tensed, gripping their weapons tighter. The frozen earth trembled under thousands of horses. 10,000 Mongol riders emerged like a black wave over the hills. Their armor was light but perfectly crafted. Bows curved elegantly in their hands. Their formation was wide, encircling, disciplined. Even in the dim light, their movement had a frightening precision. Kadan rode at the front, eyes sharp, assessing everything: the terrain, the wind, the shadows. He expected fear, he expected retreat, but he found neither. Instead, he saw 100 silhouettes standing unmoving on the ridge. Shields raised, axes resting against their shoulders, the cold light of the moon glinting off their helmets. Kadan narrowed his eyes. "They intend to fight," he muttered. A lieutenant beside him snorted. 100 against us? They are mad." Kadan did not smile. Madness is often the armor of those who have nothing left to lose. He raised his arm, signaling the archers. Instantly, 3,000 bows lifted. The sky darkened as arrows flew in one terrifying wave. The sound was like a ripping storm, hundreds of shafts cutting through the frozen air. But the Vikings did not scatter. They raised shields, a solid wall of wood and iron. Arrows slammed into them, splintering, cracking. Some men grunted in pain, but most remained standing. Eirik shouted orders, shifting the shield wall to absorb the force. Kadan frowned. These men were disciplined. Too disciplined for a small coastal militia. He ordered a second volley, then a third. Still, the Vikings held. Finally, Eirik lowered his shield and roared, "Is this the best the horsemen of the East can do?" The Mongols heard the cry echo across the battlefield. It was the first crack in the psychological dominance they relied on. Kadan stiffened. "So be it," he said coldly. "We ride." The Mongol horde surged forward, but as soon as the first ranks hit the unstable ground, horses stumbled. Hooves slipped, riders crashed. Confusion rippled through their formation. And then the Vikings charged. The Mongol front line buckled the moment their horses hit the treacherous terrain. What Kadan had believed to be firm coastal ground was, in truth, frozen mud resting over uneven stone, a surface that punished any rider who relied on speed. Panic rippled through the cavalry as hooves skidded, bodies toppled, and momentum died in an instant. High above them, the Vikings unleashed a thunderous war cry, one that crashed through the cold night like the roar of a dying world. Eirik the Cold raised his axe, its blade reflecting the moon's pale fire. "Now, forward!" The Vikings did not charge like scattered warriors. They moved as a crushing wall of muscle and metal, shields locked, axes swinging low, spears thrusting with brutal precision. They hit the confused Mongol riders like a tidal wave born of iron. The first Mongol ranks were ripped apart before they could recover. Horses shrieked, blades clashed, and the clash of steel echoed across the frozen coast. Eirik's axe found its first victim, a rider thrown from his saddle. His second victim was still mounted. His third never saw the blade coming. Every stroke was measured, controlled, deadly. For a moment, the Mongols faltered. Kadan watched the chaos from a higher ridge. His face tightened, not in fear, but in cold calculation. He was a commander shaped by battles across continents. He knew the tide of war better than most, and he understood that the Vikings had created a temporary advantage, but not a decisive one. "Reform the flank," he ordered. "Archers, move to higher ground, fire at will." His troops obeyed instantly. While the Vikings tore through the front ranks, the Mongol cavalry widened their circle, creating deadly space. Arrows began raining down again, this time from above, striking the Vikings from angles their shields could not fully protect. Several Vikings staggered back. One fell to his knees, arrow in his throat. Another collapsed with 2 shafts piercing his shoulder. But none retreated. Arna, the young warrior from earlier, took a grazing arrow to his cheek. Blood streaked down his face, warm in the cold air. He wiped it away and shouted, "Eric! They're moving to surround us." Eric saw it too. Khadan was tightening the noose. The Viking shield wall began to twist under pressure from multiple sides. The Mongols, recovering from the initial shock, regrouped with frightening speed. Riders circled like wolves, cutting at the edges, isolating stragglers. Yet every time a Mongol thought the Vikings had weakened, they found the opposite. They found men who fought until breath left their lungs, men who stood on frozen ground, as if it were sacred soil. A Mongol officer charged at Eric, swinging a curved saber. Eric blocked with his shield, sparks flying, then buried his axe into the rider's chest with a roar. Arna fought beside him, using his spear like a wild, desperate branch in a storm. He lunged, impaled a rider, then used the body's weight to wrench the weapon free. But with every minute that passed, more Mongols poured in. More arrows rained, more horses surrounded them. The Vikings' advantage was fading. Khadan rode closer now, watching the battlefield with the eyes of a man who had cracked 100 nations. He admired the Vikings, brutal, fearless, unshakable. But admiration did not change strategy. "This ends now," he said quietly. He raised his arm. The Mongol elite cavalry surged forward. Fresh riders, rested horses, precision honed by years of conquest. They descended in a tightening spiral, pushing the Vikings into a smaller and smaller circle. Eirik looked around. His warriors were bleeding. Many were wounded. Some were dying. But no one spoke of surrender. No Viking even knew the word. He lifted his axe high once more. "Brothers, this ground remembers us." The final clash was a storm of steel against speed. The Vikings fought like a trapped bear. Every strike lethal, every movement deliberate. Mongol riders fell in waves, their bodies littering the ice. But the cost was brutal. Arna was struck by a spear. He fell, gasping. Eirik rushed to him, cutting down the attacker with a furious blow. "Am I dying?" Arna whispered. "You are fighting," Eirik answered. And that is what men remember. But the Vikings were now fewer than 50. The Mongols, still thousands. Khadan finally rode through the perimeter, dismounting with calm precision. He walked toward Eric, stepping over bodies, frost, and shattered shields. "You fought like lions," Khadan said, "but even lions die." Eric wiped blood from his face. "Then come and kill me." Khadan drew his sword. The two commanders faced each other, the frozen night watching silently. Their duel would decide the fate of the last Viking stand. The world seemed to freeze around them. Eirik the Cold, standing with one knee pressed into blood-soaked ice, and Khadan, the Mongol general whose shadow stretched across continents. The surviving Vikings tightened their circle, shields raised, refusing to let their commander face death alone. Khadan studied Eric with a rare flicker of respect. "You should not have been here," he said quietly. "No force on this earth should have stood in front of my army." "Yet you did," Eric's voice was steady. "No army is unstoppable, not while free men still breathe." There was no roar this time, no charge, only silence. The kind of silence that exists before legends are carved. Khadan moved first, fast, controlled, a warrior shaped by decades of conquest. His blade arced toward Eric's head with brutal precision. Eirik blocked with his shield, the impact shaking through his bones. A second strike, a third, each one heavier than the last. Eirik countered with a sweep of his axe, sparks exploding as steel clashed. The duel circled across the frozen ground, each man testing the other's endurance, skill, and will. Around them, Mongol soldiers watched without a sound. Even they knew this was no ordinary battle. This was the final heartbeat of an ancient warrior race. Khadan pushed forward with a sudden burst of speed. Steel flashed, Eric's shield split. The Vikings staggered, only for Arna, wounded and barely standing, to shout, "Eric, don't fall!" The cry gave Eric one last surge of fury. He swung his axe in a wide, deadly arc. Kadan barely evaded it, Eric's blade slicing the fur lining of his armor. The Mongol general spun, shifting his weight with flawless control, and drove his sword deep into Eric's side. The world dimmed. Eric gasped, breath frosting the air as the pain surged through him. But he did not fall. Not yet. With the last of his strength, he seized Kadan's arm, pulling him closer until their foreheads nearly touched. "Even giants fall," Eric whispered. And with a final savage effort, he drove his axe into Kadan's thigh, forcing the general down to one knee. Mongol soldiers surged forward, but Kadan raised his hand. "No," he said, blue eyes burning into Eric's. "Respect, honor, recognition." Eric's legs finally buckled. He collapsed onto the icy ground, his axe slipping from his fingers. Arni crawled to him, dragging his bleeding body across the frost. "Eric, stay awake," Arna pleaded, voice breaking. "You can't leave, not yet." Eric looked up at the young warrior, his last surviving brother, and smiled weakly. "You fought well. Let the wind carry our names." His eyes closed, his chest stilled, and the last great Viking chieftain breathed his final breath. A long silence fell over the battlefield. Even the Mongols did not speak. Kadan stood with difficulty, leaning on his sword. He looked down at Eric with a solemn expression, then turned to his men. "Burn no bodies," he commanded. "No one touches their weapons. These men died as warriors. Leave them to the sky they honored." It was a command the Mongols rarely gave, an honor reserved only for enemies worthy of memory. The surviving Vikings, only a handful, sat beside their fallen brothers, whispering prayers into the cold wind. They did not cry. They did not beg. They simply stayed. Hours later, as dawn broke over the frozen coast, pale sunlight touched the battlefield, illuminating shattered shields, blood-stained axes, and brave men who had stood against impossible odds. History would forget the exact details, but it would never forget the fear the Mongols felt that night. Not of numbers, not of weapons, but of men who faced death with unshakable courage. The Mongols moved on, their empire continuing its march. But the legend remained. How 100 Vikings stood against 10,000 Mongol invaders and earned the respect of the greatest cavalry the world had ever known. The wind carried their names, the earth remembered their footsteps, and history carved their final stand into eternity.